Thank you, Daniel. So I have a very short time, so I'll just get to the talk and let's see how it goes. So today I'll be talking about how you can enhance your front-end development experience using a design pattern. And this design pattern is called Backend for Frontend, also known as BFF. So what is this BFF actually? As I mentioned, it is a design pattern and it is not something new. It was first introduced by Sam Newman in 2015. And this design pattern suggests us that we introduce a new server between our existing frontend and the backend. And this server is basically used just to communicate between the frontend and the backend. Why? Because it emphasizes moving all our front-end logic to this new server. What I mean by all that, of course, it's a wording you don't understand right now, but let's see some examples. At the top, what you are seeing is a traditional application, where there's a user, there's a front end, there's a backend, and there's a database. But with this design pattern, you introduce a new server in between the front end and the backend. And you can call this server with any name, but right now I am calling it BFF itself. So what's actually inside this BFF? Normally, when you have front end, you make a call to the backend server. Either you send some data or you request some data, right? But in most cases, before sending this data to the backend, you have to perform a lot of operations on it. And similarly, when you receive it, you also have to modify the data before showing it to the UI. But if you call BFF, then you have a luxury to write this logic inside the BFF. So let's say in the BFF, you have an API route. And by the way, since this is a server, you can write anything inside it. What you are seeing right now is just example scenarios where you can use BFF. So let's say you receive a call from the front end in the BFF, and now you have two choices. For example, you don't want to perform any action on the request payload. You just want to send the request to the backend. So you can just simply proxy the request to the backend server, right? But in the another scenario, it is possible that let's say you are calling a post request and you have to perform heavy logic before sending it to the backend. So you can do it in the BFF in the transformation layer. This transformation layer is a fancy word. It's just a simple function or a handler where you can write this logic to transform that request payload. And once you are done with it, you just forward the request to the backend. Once backend receives the request and resolve its response, you will receive this response in the BFF. And now again, as you transform the request payload, now you can transform the response as well. And you can write any logic here you want before sending it to the front end. So the front end will receive only what it has to show on the UI, rather than it first perform the business logic and then show it on the UI. Let's see with some example. So let's consider there's a user who comes to a website, and this website is giving a free trial, and there's a button that says start free trial, and you click on it, and then it shows this. This is the modal which takes some information, and there's a submit button. Let's see how we will implement this in any framework. Right now, I've written this code in the React. This could be small for some people, but I can't help it. So at the bottom, we are branding our modal. Our markup is not important, so I have hidden it. But we will look at the logical part. So we have a handler called handle submit, which is attached to the submit button. And at the top, we have form state, in which we have five fields. What happens when user click on the submit? We call start trial API and send a request body to it. But before sending it to it, we are first creating this body. And for that, if you notice that we are first encrypting our email and the ID. It's just an example why we are doing it. It doesn't matter, but we are doing it. And in the request body object, you will see that we are also changing the confirm key with the user consent, because it is a requirement from the backend. And also we are adding the current date into it as well. But what if we use BFF to write all this logic? Then how will our front end look like? So this is how your front end will look like if we use BFF. Now let's see what's happening in our front end. So once the user fill the modal form and submit the modal, handle submit gets triggered, and we are directly setting the form, our state, into the request body without changing anything. The only thing we have changed here is that the URL. Inside the URL, you see there's a BFF written, which means our request no more is going to the backend. We are basically sending our data to the BFF. Now let's see how BFF is handling it. Since BFF is a server, you can write it in any backend framework. I've written it in Next.js. At the top, you can see the file path. Inside it, we have a post handler. Inside it, we are receiving a request body from the front end. And now we are performing the same logic that we applied in the front end at first. And once we are done with our logic, we are sending this request body to the actual start trial backend API. So you see, if we move our front-end logic to this server, it will simplify our front-end a lot. But let's continue with the example. Let's say user has started his trial and now it is on the dashboard and it is displaying some information to it. Let's see again how we'll implement this. At the bottom, again, we are rendering user details. We don't need to say it, but in the logical part, we have user fact, and on the page load, we are calling this function fetch user data, and inside this, we are calling our backend user info endpoint, which is returning some response. And again, we are performing some logic to get those fields which we want to show on the UI, which is our in this state. So we call these 4 functions to get full name, trial start date, trial end date, and IBN, and then we are setting it on our UI. But again, let's see how our front end will look like if we use BFF. This is how this component will become. On the fetch user data function, we fetch our information, we get the response, and we just directly set it into our state without performing any logic. And it will be much simpler. And again, we are calling BFF now instead of the backend. And in the BFF, we have again the get handler. And inside it, we are calling the user information from our actual backend. And then we are performing this logic and sending it back to the front end. So front end only receives what it matters. Let's see another advanced example. Let's consider there's a user comes to the browser, performs an action, and then we are calling our BFF from the front end. Now, BFF has this API endpoint, which receives the request. And if we want to change the payload, we can do it in the request transformation layer. But let's say your website is running into 2 markets, for example, German and the Italy market. And let's consider you are into middle of a migration. So you have to show the data into German market from the backend A, which is at the top right corner. And for the Italy market, you want to show the data from your microservices, which is backend B. If you do it from the front end, it will be much harder to write a logic that supports 2 different formats from 2 different data backend. So what BFF will do is decide at this point which backend do you need based on the current market, and send your request to that market. And once the request is resolved, it will get the response. And now you can do anything with this response. For example, you can make the response from backend B same as the backend A's response and send it to front end. So front end doesn't have to write logic to support 2 different backend. Front end can write single logic, and you can transform the response from both projects to a single response which one you receive. So these were just examples. Now, these are some advantages and the scenarios where you can use BFF. What are the advantages? So if you use BFF, you can simplify your front end and you can only focus on the UI. It is more readable, scalable, and of course, filter-free. And front end doesn't have to change if there are a lot of changes happening in the backend. And similarly, there are a lot of other advantages as well. When to use, there are multiple scenarios and it could be different to each scenario. But what I have found is most beneficial BFF is where you have microservice architecture or you are migrating towards microservice architecture from monolithic architecture. These are some resources where you can study BFF in details. And this is the project that I have created just for the sake of this talk. You can go to this repository and look at the code, and I have tried to cover all the scenarios I have just shared. You will find the front end, you will find the BFF, and you will find the backend into this application. I work in a company where we face this challenge to migrate our monolithic architecture to the microservices while keeping our front end available. And it was running in maybe 20 plus markets. So we use BFF there to make this migration possible. Right now, I have hidden all the slides for this case study, but after this talk, I will enable them so you can review them on your own. So that's it from my side. If you have any question or feedback regarding my talk or the project I've created, so feel free to reach out to me via these handlers. Also, you can visit my website where I have a very cool AI chatbot where you can ask anything about me from it. So thank you.
Hey, thank you very much, Asad, and really enjoyed the talk, sir. Thank you.
You're welcome.